Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Let's Talk About podcast. And today we're talking about modern economics and innovation with Todd Hirsch. Welcome, Todd.
Nice to be here, John. Thanks for having me.
Oh, for sure. And I'm really looking forward to getting into innovation and your role as director at Innovate Calgary. But before we do that, you call yourself the Modern Economist. So let's talk about that. What do you mean by modern economist?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm glad you brought that up. Well, prior to the summer of 2022, I was the chief economist at a bank based here in Alberta, ATB Financial. And after 15 wonderful years there, I decided it was time to strike out and kind of start my own consulting company and my own speaking career. And I was looking for kind of a handle. I worked with a branding and marketing expert, and we came up with that moniker, the Modern Economist, because a lot of what I do when I talk about economics, I talk about the need to think in a new way about the economy. A lot of the, sort of the dogmatic ways we've come to think about the economy, a lot of those textbooks that came out of the late 20th century, I always say it's not that they were wrong, but they are now incomplete to describe what's happening in the national and global economies now that we are well into the 21st century. So that's the Modern Economist, sort of asking listeners and readers to, think about the economy in a new way.
Right. And I love what you're saying there around modern thinking around the economy, because from my own experience over the last few years, I've got much more into economics through investigating and researching cryptocurrency and blockchain and understanding that. And that's opened my eyes to the whole world of fiat currency and how it works. And then the cycles that people bring up and trends and insights and the various curves, candles and various other things, which I'm learning about as well. And like you say, there's so much theory, statistics around economics. I love the fact that you're saying, okay, let's look at this differently, because would you agree that the pace of change and just the uncertainty is just increasing, right?
Yeah, for sure, the pace of change. And I guess we've known for a long while, it's almost a cliche these days to say change is the new normal. I think everyone sort of understands that. But what we don't always understand very well is where this new change is leading us. And those old models of thinking about the economy, why they are incomplete. A really great example of that is social media. So you take something like Meta or Google, where the consumer is now the product itself. Those microeconomic models from the 60s and 70s, they would have no way to kind of model or even think about, when consumer like you or I is receiving a service for free and we become the commodity. This is really kind of putting on its head everything we've come to think about microeconomics in a lot of ways. And these social media companies and these digital companies, these are kind of the masters of the universe in the 21st century. They are not fringe companies that are a curiosity. They are sort of running the whole economic show in a lot of ways.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And it's interesting because I was looking at the Porter's value chain,
Yeah.
how that applies to business, because I'm doing some research around AI for my next speaking event. I was thinking, okay, and he talks around the start, which is around traditionally you build something and then you go sell it, because you build something amazing, you're solving a problem, and then people will come and buy it. But
Yeah.
what I'm seeing more and more is that you have to build up a almost a book of sales before you build it, because things are changing so quickly that by the time you've built it, the market might have moved on.
Yeah.
And also banks are now expecting a book of business, a demand for that product almost before it's been sold or just a prototype stage, because otherwise they won't fund it. They're saying you can't just build it and they will come anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And another example of how things are working differently, or maybe more precisely, how they're not working in the same way, is central banking. So
Mhm.
we are living through a period of time right now. And I used to work for the Bank of Canada much earlier in my career. So I'm really still quite interested in monetary theory and what central banks are thinking about. But now we are seeing this really interesting phase where out of nowhere, about 2 years ago, inflation just flared up And central banks are responding in their traditional way, which is sort of a water hose of higher interest rates, trying to get the flames of inflation down. And it hasn't been working, not at least not quite as well. Inflation has come down, but what we haven't seen is a cooling off of the labor market or of wages. So it's running a little bit counter to how we traditionally thought monetary policy, guided by monetary theory, how it was supposed to work. And now it's not working in the same way. I don't want to say it's not working at all. It's just working in a different way. And I think a lot of academics are going to be trying to digest what's going on in this period right now for a long time.
Right, exactly. So as we prepare for this uncertainty, as things aren't how they used to be, how would you advise people to think ahead, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, to think ahead for the economy and work towards that uncertainty?
Yeah, I've been part of a group of certain economists, I guess, that are almost calling for, is it time to stop predicting and start preparing for any outcome? Because in the past, I think we got so focused on trying to pinpoint forecast what's going to happen next. We put all of our energy and all of our analytical might as economists into forecasting. No fault of our own, but we're getting terrible at forecasting. Like, it is not even close. And it's not because our math is wrong or the models, we're doing it improperly. It's just there are so many, what Taleb would call these black swan events that come out of nowhere and completely trash our forecast. COVID, there's no better example than that. And no one really foresaw that event, or at least the timing of it. For a long time, people have been warning of pandemics, but when it hit the global economy, suddenly every economic forecast within a matter of days was completely useless and outdated. So back to your original question, when I think about, preparing for the future, I think it's now less about trying to predict what's going to happen, and rather, how can I prepare for any number of outcomes which are possible, and some maybe a bit improbable, but still possible. 3 years ago, we never thought we would see interest rates, for example, where they're at today. 5 years ago, we never would have, seen the pandemic. 2 years ago, we never would have thought we're in a ground war in Europe. So there's all these things that have a way of, kind of coming out of nowhere and laying bare almost the folly of economic forecasting. So I think it's more important in the 21st century that we put less emphasis on trying to predict what's going to happen, and more on how can I prepare my business? How can I prepare the industry I work in, maybe the city or province or state, that I live in? How can I prepare those for any possible outcome?
So taking that one step further though, because preparing for everything is an endeavor, is a lot of work.
Yeah.
So I love the idea of scenario planning for risk mitigation. Ultimately, with my IT project management background, it's all around mitigating risk. How do you deal with them if they come up? But so how do you then pick these scenarios to prepare for?
Well, I guess, and maybe it gets back to forecasting a little bit. You do have to sort of try the best you can to look into the future and make some guesses. What is likeliest to happen? But I guess I often caution us as to not get too fixated on the most likely outcome is A. So I'm going to plan only around A, because 50 years ago, you might have been pretty good at predicting A, but now it could be B, C, D, E, and even letters that we don't know yet. Again, getting back to the pandemic, no one was really prepared for it because we didn't almost have a capacity to predict that kind of pandemic. So rather than getting focused on forecasting the event, how can we develop traits within our business, within ourselves personally, maybe within industry? How can we hone the characteristics that will help us when any possible future arises, that will help us navigate our way through that? And that's what I've been spending a lot of my work as a writer and a researcher over the last several years doing.
So okay, so let's dig into that in terms of the characteristics, because I assume you're talking about being more agile, more open to change, more growth mindsets. What's your thinking there?
Well, some of those, yeah. So I'll reference a book that I wrote with a co-author back in 2017. It was called Spiders in Space, Adapting to Unwanted Change. Little did we know in 2017 that in 2020 we were going to be living in real time the biggest unwanted change, again, the pandemic. But in 2017, my co-author and I, we interviewed about 15 different, what we call successful adapters. And these were businesses, these were individuals, some of them were not-for-profits. We talked to some economic regions. They all had a similar story in that they were blindsided, sometimes over the matter of a phone call. And everything about what they knew in their business model or their planning, everything was suddenly changed overnight. And they had to rethink, okay, how do we adapt? Again, we were using the word pivot about 3 years before the word pivot started to become really fashionable. But then what we did was we did in-depth interviews with all of these different adapters, and we tried to determine what are the common characteristics that were present in every one of these. And are there ways that we can start to hone these characteristics in advance so that when we are blindsided with an unpredictable event, that we're ready and that we, in fact, do have some of that natural ability, that resilience that helps us adapt and pivot. So we came up with, it was an awkward list. We came up with 11. We didn't quite have 12, which means we're at, a dozen, but we had more than 10. So we had this list of 11, and there is a Spinal Tap reference in there.
Oh, yeah.
Viewers. Yeah, who will know? If you don't know, watch the movie. But we had a list of 11 traits and characteristics that we thought helped define as successful adapters. And then in COVID, in 2021, my co-author and I, we regrouped and we thought, we need a sequel to the Spiders in Space book. And we called it Spiders in COVID Space. And we did more interviews with more companies and individuals, specifically during COVID. These were all companies and groups that were able to pivot and show resilience in a really creative and interesting way during the pandemic. And then we arrived at actually 5 more unique characteristics that were maybe unique to COVID itself, that we were able to kind of add to the roster of characteristics that are necessary for successful adapting.
So you got up to 16.
We got 16, yeah.
Right, okay. Awesome. So yeah, so which one would be the highlights for you out of those 16? If people listening to this, watching this, are going to take away 1, 2, or 3 of them, which ones would you recommend most?
Well, it's like choosing your favorite child, because but I would say there are a couple actually that stand out. One of them is know your story, know who you are as an individual, know who you are as a company. And I don't know if every company or every board of directors or every senior leadership team has done that heavy work. We spend a lot of time in the corporate world defining mission statements and value statements, and all those are good. They're valuable for sure. But your story, sort of where did you originate? What brought you to this point, and where are you going? That's the arc of a story. And to be able to identify your story, to know to the core who you are, again, as an individual or as a business, that was really helpful for all of the interviews when we asked, companies or business leaders about their adapting story time and time again. These companies, they knew who they were and they knew who they weren't as a business. Right. And if you don't know that, you're going to be in trouble. And I'll reference a quick little story because some of your listeners might be curious as to the title of the book, Spiders.
Yeah, I am, yes.
Well, I'll kind of abbreviate the story for this podcast, but first at Space Lab, later at the International Space Station, to observe what will a spider do in zero gravity, especially around building a web. Right. Because any observer of spiders on Earth will know that, a spider lowers itself down on its thread, and it uses gravity and it uses its body's weight to build tension in the threads to create the web. From an engineering standpoint, gravity is kind of the essential element of web building. So the scientists and the NASA engineers were interested, just what would a spider do without gravity? Well, as it turns out, the spiders get up there and they're confused and they're disoriented for a little while, and that's a natural part of adapting.
Mm.
You got to give yourself some space to breathe and figure this out. But after a fairly short period of time, the spiders, and different breeds of spiders will do this in a different way. It's fascinating. But spiders will create a whole new structure of web, a brand new design of web that never had to build here on Earth, that does not require the gravity. They sort of learn to push themselves off the edge of the container and build tension in their web that way, and build totally new structures and designs of webs. But one of the things we think that helped the spider, and now I don't want to, pretend that I can really get into the brain of a spider, but interestingly, the spider did not have to change its story. The spider knows it is a trapper. It builds a web to trap its prey. It doesn't have to morph into something that it is not. It had to figure out, how do I live my story as a web builder and a trapper of prey? And how do I live that in an environment that has changed on me entirely? So the spiders fundamentally know their story. They know who they are. They know what they do and what they don't do. And businesses, I think, are the same way. It's, not quite the same as being rigid and saying we're only doing, this because that's what we've always done. But knowing your story is fundamental for helping companies and individuals pivot when that unwanted change hits them, blindsides them.
So when you say story, often, by the way, fascinating about the spiders as well. Like, so they stay trappers rather than change it to hunters, or using the environment in a different way. So that is fascinating to know that they still did that, but just in a different way.
Yeah,
and also love your point around take a breath. When big change happens, is that moment of regroup, refocus, and then restart. It's the 3 R's that I use all the time when it's in that moment of crisis.
Yeah. Even spiders, they didn't get it right off the bat. And it was quite a lot of, even after their period of dormancy, when they were just, obviously confused about what's going on. But even when they started building their web, there was trial and error for sure. They didn't knock it out of the park right off the bat. They eventually got it. But I guess to your point, it's always important that we each give ourselves some breathing room, some ability to kind of mess it up if we're adapting, because that is part of the process of eventually getting it right.
Yes. Yeah. So then when you say story, typically I often think of the hero's journey, the movies, the fairy tales, like I say, the storytelling. But I'm hearing you're saying story around almost your background, your experience for the company, yourself. But just is that right? What do you mean by the story for a company?
Well, I guess a story for the company is, going right back to their origins. How did they start? Is this a 2-year-old startup in the tech sector, or is this a 200-year-old company designing furniture or luggage? A really interesting story is the story of Lego. It started in the 30s in Denmark, and it really kind of was pretty much as Lego is today. And there's a great documentary, I don't know, it's on one of the streaming services, about Lego. Yeah. And somewhere in the 80s and 90s, they kind of lost their way a little bit. They started building theme parks and designing children's clothes and doing all this other stuff. And then, when crisis hit, they had to redefine, or they had to get back to who they were. They had to go back to their original story. Our story is we design creative toys for children, blocks particularly. We can still do that in different ways. We can innovate, we can do different products, but they had to sort of relearn their story from the beginning. So that's what I mean, story for a company. What are your origins? What brought you to the place where you're at now? What lessons are part of your story that you can go back and mine those historic lessons for wisdom and guidance in the present day?
Yeah, but I love Lego, by the way, especially the
Oh,
7
I
and
did
8
too.
Lego. A few years back, I went back and rebought all my classic Lego sets that I've either lost or just got
I
dismantled over the
actually,
years.
we actually keep a big bowl of just colorful Lego blocks as a centerpiece on our dining room table.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And, guests come over, dinner guests or whatever, and they're always kind of a bit puzzled, like, why do you have Lego on the table? But then they start playing with
Oh,
it.
yeah.
And it's a great conversation starter, and it just changes the dynamic of the dinner party when just, adults are playing with Lego blocks. It brings
Oh,
them
it's
back.
fascinating.
I,
I love
I,
it. And fun fact is the Lego is the biggest tire manufacturer in the world by
oh,
volume
really?
because they make so many little
The
tires
little,
for
yeah, the
Lego.
little, yeah,
So there you go.
yeah.
But like, so yeah, so where was I? Building on the story for the company. So that was definitely one of the 16 you wanted to highlight. So of the other 16, which others would you highlight for?
Well, there were a few that came out of COVID that I think are really pertinent, and they have to do with relationship building. Um, one of the big themes that came out of the characteristics that sort of rose to the top during our COVID sequel book was depending on others, building relationship, building connection. A lot of them talked about trust. They had to build trust, especially for some of them, trust in their team. We had one CEO of a not-for-profit, and he confessed. He said, when COVID happened and we had to send our workers home, I didn't trust them. He goes, I did not trust that they were going to get anything done.
You don't know.
We don't know. Yeah. But he learned very quickly he had no choice. He had to trust his team, and his team came through for him. And that was an important learning for him is the importance of trust. We had other characteristics around building relationships, even with competitors. We had one company that talked about, we always knew relationships with our clients is really important, but during COVID, and they always knew who their competitors were. And they were, not unfriendly, but they didn't really have a relationship with them. During COVID, they had to build a relationship with their competitors. It was sort of that we all have to tie our lifeboats together during this storm if we're going to make it through it all.
Right.
So my co-author and I, we talk about the importance of building a relationship before the crisis happens. That is, of course, relationship with your team members, with your direct reports, with your, board of directors, with your clients for sure, but also with your competitors. Because when the sudden unwanted change hits you, you're going to find out the value of having fostered those relationships.
Yeah.
So that was another one. In addition to know your story, build strong relationships and learn to depend on that is another standout characteristic.
And so this is interesting as well because there's two thoughts come to my mind here. One is around you're actually building the what does AI, artificial intelligence, not do for us in terms of we create our own history because AI can't live it for us.
Yeah.
And the second thing around that relationship building, connections, the trust, that's not something AI can do for us. It's very much a human interaction.
Yeah.
We then use and leverage to create business and like you say, build relationships with competition as well. And I think you pointed it out well. We're not expecting you to suddenly be best buddies with your competition or anything like that, but just
Right.
having some sort of relationship means there are some things to share because at the end of the day, we are all in it together, especially something like COVID. And I think more recently around the cyber attacks in Calgary around the oil and gas and
Yeah.
some of the companies have come together to say, okay, we as an industry cannot be attacked like this. So how do we as an industry come together to make it more secure as well?
Yeah. And, even the principle that we are all stronger as an industry, we're sort of greater than the sum of the parts. So, having your competitors in good shape is also actually good for the industry. It's good for your own position as a company because it's going to keep you sharper. It's going to keep you
Yes.
constantly innovating, constantly, moving forward. Rather than thinking about crushing your competition, you're actually leveraging your competition to move yourself forward. It's a different way, I think, of thinking about, sort of economic rivals and your competitors, is that you don't want to crush them necessarily, but you do want to use them to leverage your own growth.
Yes, get ahead, maybe even leave them behind. But it's to your point, not crush them, not destroy them in the process, because there's enough. I'm always a big fan of there's enough success for everyone.
Yeah. There's a great example here in Calgary, and your listeners I know are from all over, and I won't mention the names of the companies, but there was a small brewery that started maybe about 6 or 7 years ago. And it was a scrappy little startup. It was just a couple of people who, had this dream of putting together a great tasting local craft beer. They had no money. So they kind of schemed this idea where if they found investors, for $1,000, I think it was maybe $5,000, they got a free case of beer for the next 5 years, or something like that. And they had all kinds of people sign up, but one of the signups was actually one of the largest breweries here in Calgary, who they would have seen as a direct competitor. And I won't mention the company, but they went to that large brewery and they said, "How come you are buying into, this startup? We're actually trying to compete with you." And the large brewery told them, they said, "We think we are all stronger as an industry if we're all doing well. We want to see you do well.
Yeah.
We of course want to do even better, but we feel we're stronger as a company if our competitors are also in good shape." I thought that's a totally different way of sometimes looking at competition.
Yes, that is awesome as well. And and also just that having the taste for the next 5 years, whatever it is is a connection. You have to physically go somewhere to meet someone to do that. So that's pretty neat. I love that.
Yeah.
So what would you be the third? So we talked about story, talked about relationship, connections. What would be a third one?
Another one I think is, it was almost remarkable how in every interview, and we sat down and we chatted with these people for 2 or 3 hours, mostly in person if we were able to. But at some point in their story, they would say something like, "It was the hardest thing we ever had to do," or "We had no idea how difficult the process was going."
Talking about COVID?
No, not COVID, just their unwanted change that hit them.
Right. Okay.
This was the pre-COVID book when, and every story is different, but when the sudden change happened and they had to pivot, and I guess it would be similar for the ones during COVID too, but they all sort of spoke about the process of adapting or the process of pivoting was enormously difficult. They all spoke about that in really serious tones. So we thought one of the traits is, going into this eyes wide open, knowing that this is going to be tough work. Let's not be delusional. There's no 7 easy steps for adapting to unwanted change. It would be nice if there was, but there isn't. It's going to be hard work. You're going to have to put a lot of your passion into it. And knowing that right off the bat, like, if you're a business owner and everything suddenly has changed, and you're thinking, maybe it's time for me personally to wind this down and try something different. Knowing that if you proceed, it is going to be a lot of work. You might want to actually do something different. So I guess the characteristic is understanding that adapting to unwanted change is going to be difficult, and you have to be aware of that before you go down the path or you're in trouble.
Yeah, it's spot on as well, because it's doing some research for one of my books as well. The humans need an element of change. It's just human nature to have some sort of change, variety, something new. That's why we love alerts and pings and texts and emails, because we're looking for that dopamine hit of something new and interesting coming up, even though it's happen. But the challenge is too much change creates stress, and everyone's a little bit different. That's what makes us unique, what makes collaboration so interesting. But to your point around the tough journey and the work involved, is because when you have a collective of people, everyone's going to adapt to that change better than others. Some just need a little bit over a longer time. Some people thrive on a lot of change I need right now. And then there's the people in the middle. And as a company, you need to accommodate for all those different levels of change appetite.
Yeah. When I was working for ATB Financial, and they won't mind me sharing this story, but ATB, a medium-sized regional bank, was undergoing a lot of change, as everyone was adapting to new digital platforms, and so there was a lot of change in the industry that was happening. And we spent a lot of time as a company, as team members, understanding that adapting to change is personal. Some people are going to be way ahead. Some people are going to take a longer time to get there. And then there's going to be a lot of people sort of in the middle.
Yes.
But just how important it is that we all sort of be patient with each other and bringing those along that maybe need a little bit of encouragement or a little bit of help. And then maybe also tempering some of the expectations of the rabbits who are way off, already adapting to change. Maybe they need to learn that they need to, I don't want to say pull back, but they also need to be conscious of, we are moving on this journey together and we move at different speeds, but we need to be gracious with each other as we do that.
Yes. And it's important to realize that change and learning growth, whatever you want to call it, doesn't go away I think we often think back to, when I was a kid, it was a lot less stressful than anything else, but you had to change. It was whether a new school or new toys to deal with, or new friends, whatever. But now, and as we progress through our careers or our entrepreneur journeys or our solopreneur journeys or businesses, whatever it is, the level of change grows with where we are.
Yeah.
And it is a journey. It just doesn't stop. It's I often used to think, okay, when's this going to get to the plateau? When's this going to settle down? And it doesn't. And if it does, you're probably not growing or progressing anyway.
Yeah. My pal Eric Tremunde, he's a speaker on leadership. He's got this great line. He said, "The two things people hate the most are change and the way things are."
Yes.
And that kind of sums up, in a lot of ways, this is our human dilemma. We don't want to change, but we know if we don't, staying static, you as a living human being, nothing stays static. You have to embrace change, even if it's uncomfortable.
Yes. Yeah. Which is a great segue, actually. I love it because I want to just move into your new role. Congratulations, by the way, as director of the Innovate Calgary, because that's innovation's all about change, bringing new things. And especially this actually neatly ties together because we talked about Modern Economist and how the economy is changing and can't always predict for it. But innovation needs funding, needs some sort of economic prediction to know how you're going to build something out and prove it out. So let's just explore that a bit in terms of how have you seen the world of innovation change over time?
Well, it's fascinating, and I am. I'm one of the directors at Innovate Calgary. Innovate Calgary, maybe a bit of a background for your listeners. It's a project of the University of Calgary to help bring research ideas at the university to a commercialized stage. And it has 5 sort of innovation hubs. I'm the director of the Energy Transition Center. So there are other hubs around life sciences, social innovation, one around aviation, but I'm the director of the Energy Transition Center, which is a fascinating place to be right now because, and again, that, we hate change and we hate the way things are. For a city like Calgary, for a province like Alberta, I think everybody understands the energy sector needs to transition. Now, where people will disagree on is exactly what that should look like and who should pay for it. And those are where the really tough, some of the tough conversations are happening. But it's so interesting because unlike 10 years ago, when people were not even really on the same page around climate change, that conversation is completely different in 2023.
Right.
No one that I know of, I don't want to say no sensible person, but no one really in the conversation is any longer saying there is no issue with climate change. Now the conversation is, how do we address this? Energy Transition Center, it's a partnership of Innovate Calgary and Avatar Industries, which is a really interesting company. that provides some venture capital. I won't get into all the details, but listeners should look it up and check
Yeah.
it out. Provides some venture capital to startups who are doing really interesting things around energy transition, moving us to a low or net zero carbon future. Energy Transition Center, it's a physical space in downtown Calgary that really seeks to bring together a lot of these conversations. It provides office space and a collaboration space for these startup companies that are actually doing the work of moving us. So for them, the conversations have stopped and now they are actually doing. We understand we still also need to be talking too. So we do a lot of sessions where we bring people together, have a panel conversation or an afternoon little mini conference, those kinds of things, all around the topic of transition. And it ties in really nicely with my basic theme as an economist. I'm not an energy economist, but in everything I talk about the need to transform what we're doing. Even getting back to my title, The Modern Economist, new ways of thinking about things, transforming things. So when I had this opportunity to be the director of the Energy Transition Center, I thought this is too perfect of a match of both things I'm passionate about talking about, but also something that I think Canada's energy industry, we are doing and we need more of it, and that is transition.
Yeah. So what advice, so how do we navigate that with the uncertainty of the economy, the funding potential from Avatar? How do we, what advice, I guess that's the question is, what advice would you give young innovators or old innovators, but young startup companies wanting to innovate more?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the advice I would give them is know that maybe getting back to the traits of the successful adapters, know this is going to be hard work. You are not likely to hit it out of the park and succeed on your first venture. This might take several iterations of the project or the research that you are working on. And because I'm not an engineer, I don't even understand what they're doing, but I do understand from the economic point of view is that success is often a long journey of many,
Yeah.
many failures, which we use as spots to learn. So the advice I would give them, and I'm sure they're getting this advice and they're living this advice, is that it's going to be hard work. Path to success is going to be, full of bumps along the way. But another wise person told me once, you can't climb a smooth mountain. You need some
Okay.
bumps. So use the bumps. A smooth mountain is almost impossible to climb. You need some bumps along the way, but you use the bumps to progress up the mountain.
Oh, I love that. It's there's another analogy about something about the rocky road, but I actually love the and not the ice cream, by the way, just the path with the rocks in it. But I love the you can't climb a smooth mountain. That's awesome. I love that one. And it's interesting as well. I'm a big fan of Peter Diamandis and his health innovation technology, and he often says around his overnight success was 11 years in the making. It's not a yes. There's a and what's the other one I'm a big fan of is the luck is the combination of opportunity and hard work, because you
Mhm.
can suddenly take advantage of the opportunity because you've done the hard work, and then luck comes of that as well. So
Yeah.
big fan of that, because it's any journey takes a while. And the problem is this day and age, you see all these YouTube adverts and these, the TikTok stars saying, "Hey, I'll make you a millionaire in a month," and I want to earn 100 grand every 4 weeks, and it just gets a bit sort of, okay, yes, you can do that, but it doesn't happen in 2-3 months time. It
No,
happens
it isn't.
years, if at all, because not everyone can achieve that. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's frustrating because a lot of people's expectations are set around that rapid result.
Yeah, and another piece of advice, and something you were just talking about triggered in my memory. Another piece of advice I might give them is another one of the characteristics from our book on adapting to change, and that is look for help in unusual places.
Right. Okay.
When we go to look for help, all of us need help. I think everyone understands that, but there's typical places we're going to go and look for help. And some of those doors might shut on us. But again, when we interviewed all of these successful adapters for researching the book, another really similar theme that they would talk about this all the time. They would say, fortunately for us, we met this person at that time, or we had no idea that this other group was, there to help us. All of this serendipitous help that was present, but you had to look beyond your blinders to see it. Sometimes I think we get focused on who we think is going to help us or who we think should be helping us.
Yes.
Sometimes it might be the bank, and the bank's not helping me.
Why wouldn't you give me money? Yeah.
Well, why would you give me money? And sometimes the banks will help, but lots of times the banks will. But lots of times it's important we take our blinders off and we look for the chorus of help that maybe comes from surprising places. That was a really big theme that a lot of the successful adapters referenced.
Yes, and then building on that as well is there's a lot of discussion around saying no to opportunities, like niching down, like narrow it down. I'm actually counter that. I'm actually a big fan of the say yes, especially in the early stages. Just say yes and figure it out, because more and more conversations you had, like say finding help in unusual, unfamiliar places, the yes will get you there, but if saying no is never going to get you there. Yeah. So and the fear of overwhelm, the fear of how we're going to do this, the fear of uncertainty by saying yes, is real. I have it myself, but it's learning more and more to say, okay, yes, and let's figure this out. Because what I find is I say yes, and then I have a track of expectation in my mind, which is, oh my God, what have I done? But in reality, it changes. It's right back to, I think, your very first point around the initial plan doesn't always pan out as expected for various reasons. Sometimes you make a choice, sometimes things happen, sometimes another thing comes from left field, and in reality, it still gets done.
Yeah.
Exactly. Wow. So, yeah. But also, so in terms of advice for innovators coming up and startups, it's expect to put in the work and then look for the help in unusual places.
Another one that I would add, and it comes from a story I like to tell. Most of the viewers will probably be old enough to remember the original American Idol TV show.
Right.
Going back now, probably, I don't know, 20 years, 15, I don't know how. But when the American Idol show first launched, two of the three original judges were Simon Cowell and Paula Abdul.
Right.
And then there was Randy Jackson, the other judge. But there was this, really kind of fun tension between Simon and Paula. Paula was always the one that would say, "You're amazing. Shoot for the stars. Never give up your dreams. You're going to make it. You're wonderful." And then Simon would say, he said, "Well, you might be wonderful at something, but you can't sing. You've embarrassed yourself and everybody here tonight. Find something else to do, because you are not, at the American Idol." And the weird thing was, you need both of those voices in your life. You need them both. And they're both probably equally important. You need somebody cheering you on, saying, "Never stop, never give this up, keep going." But then you also need somebody to say, "Well, keep going, but you might need to, be flexible in this. You might need to think about this in a different way." It's the wisdom, knowing when to be flexible and when to be firm and laser focused. And again, both of those are so important, the flexible and laser focused, but it takes a lot of wisdom and discernment to know when to be firm and when to flex.
Right.
And the only advice I'd give, for people is find mentors, find people who have been through this. Even if it's not a startup, find a 70-year-old, person, like a veteran in the business world, and ask questions about, how did you know when it was necessary to be firm and focused, and when it was necessary to be flexible.
Yes. Learn from their experience and mistakes.
That's my playbook for this. It's all intuition and discernment and wisdom.
And a big fan of coaches. I've had many coaches along the way in terms of, and each for very specific reasons as well. It's coaches are sometimes a fit for several months or several years. And like you say, it's learning from their mistakes, depending on where you are in your journey.
Yeah.
Um, and there's a lot of, I mean, some coaches are very expensive. I was just chatting with a coach of the day, and their fee is, I think for 1 hour per month, their fee is $250,000 per year. So it's I'm sure they're not the most expensive, but I was blown away by that. But anyway, what I'm leading to say is there's a lot of online free advice as well. Don't feel you have to invest a lot of money. I'm all for investing money into coaching because I think it's a great payback in developing yourselves. But if you don't have the financial assistance available or money available, there's a lot online. There's a lot of advice you can get by doing research. And I'd also wrap that up with saying, take the information, but trust and verify. Apply it to your situation, because you're getting advice from them based on their experience, their journey through it. But then your experience is very unique. It's very personal. So use it in the right way as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really important because there is no manual for any of these things. There is no turn to page 410 and look under section 6.1, and that will give you the instruction on how to deal with whatever it is. There is no instruction manual, especially when you're a startup. But there is the wisdom of those who have come before, and those mentors, I think, are invaluable. Finding the right ones, and like you said, you can find them everywhere. You can find them free. You can pay for them. You can make friends with people. But wisdom of mentors, I think, is something that hugely valuable. And I hope we're not losing that. I don't know. I'd like to believe that we're not losing that, but I don't know.
No, I actually think, if anything, there's more of it. I think the especially since COVID, but also a little bit before that, the whole coaching industry has just exploded over the last 5 years, because anyone can stand up a YouTube channel and claim they can earn you $100,000 in 3 months. So you have to spend a bit of time working through that. But then I think as AI comes in, artificial intelligence comes in more and more, that human, here's how that intuition, that feeling, that emotion, I think is going to become more and more important. I think we're going to use AI, and we should use AI as a tool to base information around how should I approach this problem, or what are other competitors doing, or how should I summarize this document. But then you go to your point earlier, networking, collaboration, mentorship, coaching as well, to get the real, okay, here's how it's going to work in practice.
Yeah. And I would also add to that, don't discount the value of, older people, mature workers. It might be tempting. I don't know. Maybe I'm saying this because I am like veering dangerously quickly into being a mature worker. But if you're a 25-year-old and you've got a tech startup, don't assume that the 75-year-old won't have some valuable input.
Yeah.
They might not understand the technology in the world that you're working in. That's fair enough. But they will understand the situation and the problem that you're facing with change, and knowing, again, the wisdom of knowing when to be flexible and when to be firm.
Yeah.
So don't discount that, even if they didn't work in your industry, or maybe were not a tech startup when they were 25.
Yeah, it was interesting. I listened a lot to Gary Vaynerchuk, Gary V. I find his attitude amazing in terms of the energy he's got. And one of the things he said the other day was, listen to the 8-year-olds, the younger, who just haven't been influenced by life yet, and listen to the 80-year-olds who have gone through life and understood everything, and loads of less shares information to share as well. So to your point, older and also very, very young, observing kids as well in terms of how they innovate, adapt, and just get things done.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. The 8 and the 80s.
Yeah. But this was awesome, Todd. Really enjoyed this. We covered a lot of ground all the way through to the spiders in space, and the three learnings of the 16 that you had around making sure you have a story, your background, building relationships, the connections, and the third one being expect the process to take time, work through it, and put in the effort there as well. Yeah. And then wrapping up with the advice for entrepreneurs as part of your Innovate Calgary directorship there for the Energy Transition Center, to, again, put in the work, can't expect success quickly, finding help in unusual places, and then be prepared to flex, so have a plan, but be prepared to adjust and work through that.
Yeah.
So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Any other last words, thoughts that you wanted to share with our listeners and watchers?
Well, I guess the only thing I'd add is, every one of us, I mean, it doesn't matter if we're 8 or 80, we're living in a period of time right now that is feeling very unsettled. And the way I think about this is, economically or societally or culturally, we are in this liminal space that I talk about. We are moving from one model of existence into another one, from the 20th century into something that has not yet arrived. But it's normal when you are in this liminal space of moving from one state to another, that there is confusion. It can be really emotional. It can be disorienting. I think a lot of people are feeling that way right now. Traditional ways of dealing with the economy, like we talked about earlier, they're not working in the same ways. Finding surprising results and maybe some troubling developments in our political systems and our political institutions. They're not operating the same way they used to. I would just sort of encourage all of us to, when we're feeling confused and disoriented and maybe a little afraid, to take a deep breath, rely on the relationships, be kind to each other, be kind to yourself, because as we move through this liminal space, there's a lot to learn. What will yet arrive is going to be amazing, but only if we build it to be amazing. That is where we just need to give ourselves some patience and be patient and kind with others.
Yeah, I love it. It's the compassion for sure. That's powerful. And just to build on that as well, is look back on where you've come from as well, where you've developed to, because most of us are on that journey, and it might take years, months, decades. But give yourself a break, to give yourself a breath, and then look back at where you've come from, because I guarantee you'll have made some progression in some area of your life to get to this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Really important wisdom there.
Awesome. Love it. Well, great. Thank you, Todd. Really appreciate your time. And and if people want to find you on
the easiest way to connect with me is my website, which is just toddhirsch.com. And that's Hirsch with an HIRSCH.com. Or you can go to Speaker Spotlight. I'm on their roster of speakers if you're interested in having me as a speaker. But I love for people to connect with me in any which way. So I welcome that.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll certainly get some folks looking you up. Great stuff. Well, thanks for your time, and we'll chat again soon.
Thanks, John.
Right. Cheers. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Let's Talk About It podcast, brought to you by WeDeliverYourVision.com, the go-to place for delivering your vision and getting traction fast.